Across the South, especially in Virginia, striking reminders of a unique period of America's past dot the landscape. They're homes such as these, the so-called great houses of the plantations, that were the economic and social centers of what was a dominant part of the early United States. A number of the great houses of early plantations still exist, along with many of their associated outlying buildings called dependencies, which were important supporters of each plantation's operations. Plantations are often filled with history, and many, including those you will see in this program, welcome visitors. The individuals who built these structures were no doubt as different as the architectural styles that the homes display. But the builders of the plantations of the South had much in common. Those common characteristics are combined in the mythic image of the planter, a paradoxical figure of America's past. Without question, the planters of Virginia were extraordinary. Many of the earliest departed England as democratic urges were challenging the monarchy and came to America with memories of English country life and gracious living. The land they confronted was still largely wilderness, and out of it they carved large farms that were often, but not always, profitable. The plantations were almost like small countries, or at least towns, and the planters were their undisputed rulers. A plantation might have a population numbering in the hundreds, land holdings of hundreds if not thousands of acres, and perhaps other commercial operations, such as shipbuilding or light manufacturing. The planter presided over all, running a large and complex business, providing what local government there was, and perhaps also pursuing other interests, such as politics or scholarship. The talents, energy, and competence required were tremendous, and the successful planters were clearly gifted individuals. The fact that a number of our early presidents were Virginia plantation owners shows both the talents of the planters and the importance of plantations. So too do these houses. But the successes of the planters came at the expense of others, for there is another side to the plantations. Many plantations were created on land previously occupied by Indians, and all relied on exploitative forms of cheap labor, indentured servants, and slaves. Today, on most plantations, slave buildings are rarely among those which have been preserved or restored, but their absence should not prevent recognition of the contributions made by those who labored as slaves in early America. The history of Virginia, the South, and America belongs as much to them as it does to the more famous historical figures we tend to think of when considering the past. Today, remnants of the plantations of early America can be found across the South. In this introduction, you've seen some prominent Virginia plantations. They include Stratford Hall, home for almost a century to the prominent Lee family of Virginia. Robert E. Lee, commander of the Confederate armies during the Civil War, was born here. Westover Plantation, with its extraordinarily beautiful great house. Situated along the banks of the James River, a row of majestic oak trees, 150 feet tall, shades this stunning house. Sherwood Forest, a distinctively designed plantation and one with a unique historical claim. At 300 feet in length, this is the longest frame house in America, and its design is notable. Unlike other plantation homes which imitated English and European architecture, this house is one of the first to have an innovative design that is genuinely American. This is also the only home in America to be owned by two unrelated presidents, William Henry Harrison, 9th President of the United States, and John Tyler, the 10th. Today, the Tyler family still occupies the plantation, graciously welcoming visitors. Berkeley Plantation, a plantation unusually laden with history. Some examples: it was the birthplace of Benjamin Harrison, who signed the Declaration of Independence, and of 9th President William Henry Harrison. Taps, the military standard, was composed here, and legend has it that bourbon was invented at Berkeley. Evelynton, This reconstructed house stands at the site of the original buildings of Evelynton Plantation, which were burned by Union troops during the Civil War. For almost 150 years, it has been owned by the Ruffin family, whose patriarch, Edmund Ruffin, fired the first shot at Fort Sumter, beginning the Civil War in April of 1861. Join us now as we take a further look at 3 plantations. Mount Vernon, home of George Washington. Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's legendary home near Charlottesville. And the Shirley Plantation, a plantation on the banks of the James River in southeastern Virginia. Of the great early homes of America, few are as legendary as Mount Vernon, for more than 4 decades the home of George Washington. Situated on the banks of the Potomac River near Washington, D.C., it stands today as a monument to General Washington and is a meticulously maintained record of an important part of his life. The land on which Mount Vernon is situated was granted to George Washington's great-grandfather in 1674. The general's father acquired the property more than 50 years later in 1726, although his family was not residing in Mount Vernon when George Washington was born in 1732. As a young child, though, Washington did live with his family at Mount Vernon for 4 years. George Washington first acquired Mount Vernon by lease from his elder half-brother's widow in 1754. 7 years later, in 1761, he inherited Mount Vernon following her death. For 45 years, Mount Vernon was home to the general and his wife Martha, although his public career often kept him away. In 1858, after passing through a succession of heirs, Mount Vernon was purchased by the Mount Vernon Ladies Association, the first national historic preservation organization in America. Due to their early, persistent, and thorough efforts, as well as Washington's own habit of thorough record-keeping, Mount Vernon is very much as it was in Washington's time. Documented. He once wrote that no estate in United America is more pleasantly situated than this. And considering Mount Vernon's location overlooking the Potomac River and the Maryland shores on the other side, who would disagree? The river itself played an important role in the landscaping of Mount Vernon's grounds. Low-hanging groves of trees allow a sweeping view of the Potomac and set off the distinctively designed mansion. The planning, design, and building of Mount Vernon, its buildings, grounds, and farms were all done by Washington. For, like other plantations, Mount Vernon is essentially the reflection of one man's vision, energy, talents, and plain competence. Washington, like other planters, grasped the dream of carving a large commercial farming operation out of the wilderness of North America. He succeeded in realizing his dream, amassing several thousand acres of working farmland and creating an enterprise that at its peak was also almost a small town with its population of more than 200 people, many of them slaves and indentured servants. And over a period of 30 years, he built the great house itself, which stands today as a vivid manifestation of his vision. Much of the planning, building, and running of Mount Vernon undoubtedly took place in this room, Washington's study. From this room, Washington managed the numerous affairs of Mount Vernon and its farms, kept the detailed records of the plantation, wrote his daily diary, and maintained his correspondence, much of it addressing the political concerns of the young nation. He took an especially active part in the affairs of Mount Vernon, seeming to delight in its careful, energetic management. He rose early, often before sunrise, and went immediately to the study where he prepared himself for the day. There he might have busied himself writing letters or posting his accounts before having breakfast. Washington's tireless efforts produced results. The farm's net income was probably never large because profits were reinvested. But over the years, Washington's land holdings grew substantially. In his 45 years there, Mount Vernon's size quadrupled from a little more than 2,000 acres to approximately 8,000. On Saturdays, Washington's managers, overseers, and craftsmen would report their week's activities to him here in the study. These were often transcribed by Washington or a secretary, and many still exist today. These and other records have been invaluable in restoring Mount Vernon. As we've said, Washington was a meticulous record keeper, had a daily diary, and wrote many letters. These sources and other records, such as the inventory of Mount Vernon made upon Washington's death, have made possible the plantation's faithful restoration. Through the efforts of the Mount Vernon Ladies Association and concerned individuals, many of the furnishings seen in the mansion are those which were in the house during Washington's lifetime. Those which are not original were carefully selected to replace furnishings and artifacts known to have been at Mount Vernon with the general. Chemical analysis was used to determine the paint colors favored by Washington at the end of his life, and the house has been painted in those colors. Because of such attention to detail and the early start of preservationists, Mount Vernon is certainly the most faithfully restored of all homes of its period. As was common at Virginia plantations during Washington's time, most of the labor at Mount Vernon was done by slaves and, to a lesser extent, indentured servants who lived lives far less fortunate than those enjoyed by the Washingtons. A census undertaken by Washington in 1799 in preparation for freeing his slaves under the terms of his will showed that there was a population of around 300 slaves, although many were too old or too young to work. A little more than 1/3 were owned by the general, while nearly 2/3 were bound to Martha Washington from the estate of her first husband. Many slaves worked on the plantation's outlying farms, which were run by overseers, some of whom were slaves themselves. The occupations of other slaves were diverse. Perhaps 1/3 were skilled craftsmen, including blacksmiths, carpenters, gardeners, shoemakers, painters, brickmakers, and millers. Women laboring at the Mansion House farm worked as spinners, weavers, seamstresses, cooks, dairymaids, and house servants. Although he continued to own slaves, Washington resolved after the Revolution to never again buy or sell a slave. Some of his later writings also reveal an evolving disapproval of the institution of slavery. He once wrote, "I wish from my soul that the legislative of this state could see the policy of a gradual abolition of slavery." In his will, he included provisions for the care and support of his freed slaves, which occurred 1 year after his death. George Washington died at Mount Vernon in December 1799. One newspaper account attributed his death to an inflammation of the throat, which developed after a harsh winter ride at Mount Vernon. Both he and Martha, who died 2.5 years later, are entombed there. Situated on a mountaintop about 2 miles southeast of Charlottesville, Virginia, is another of the great plantations of America, Monticello. It was home to and the creation of Thomas Jefferson, 3rd President of the United States, regarded by many as one of the most educated and intelligent people to ever hold that office. His education and intellectual energy is reflected in many ways in Monticello. This is especially true of Monticello's design, for Jefferson had a consuming interest in architecture. He once wrote that architecture is my delight and the putting up and pulling down one of my favorite amusements. Unlike other plantation owners in North America, Jefferson had a special interest in the architecture of the European continent. As a result, Monticello shows little evidence of England's Georgian architecture, which so greatly influenced other plantations and the buildings of colonial Williamsburg, Virginia's early capital. Jefferson's dislike of Georgian architecture was so great that he once referred to the buildings of Williamsburg as rude, misshapen piles. He chose an alternative school of architecture instead. In its day, the architecture of Monticello was regarded as innovative and sophisticated. A French nobleman wrote in 1782, "Mr. Jefferson is the first American who has consulted the fine arts to know how he should shelter himself from the weather." Like Washington's building of Mount Vernon, Thomas Jefferson's building of Monticello was a lifelong pursuit. He was born at Shadewell, the family home near Monticello, in 1743. At age 14, he inherited the 1,000-acre estate from his father, which included the land upon which Monticello was later built. His writings first contained the name Monticello, Italian for Little Mountain, when he was 24 years old. When he was 26, Jefferson began construction of Monticello. He moved there in 1770, with construction still very much underway after Shadewell burned. For the next 40 years, Jefferson worked on Monticello, designing, building, redesigning, rebuilding, and remodeling, putting up and pulling down, as we have said. The house was substantially completed by 1782, 13 years after construction was begun. In 1789, after 5 years abroad in Europe, mostly as minister to France, Jefferson decided to expand and remodel the great house to reflect his exposure to the latest European architecture. This remodeling effort did not actually begin until 1796 and was not completed until 1809, resulting in Monticello as we know it today. All of these construction efforts were often slowed by Jefferson's public activities. They were sometimes demanding, occasionally keeping him away from Monticello for years at a time. For Jefferson's contributions to our early history were substantial, and his achievements many. He was a member of the Continental Congress, signer of the Declaration of Independence, governor of Virginia, minister to France, secretary of state, vice president, President of the United States for 8 years, and founder of the University of Virginia. During his lifetime, his landholdings grew substantially. Even though it appears that Monticello was never financially lucrative, Jefferson was able to increase his total landholdings in Albemarle County from 1,000 acres to close to 5,600. Like Washington, Jefferson tried a number of crops at his farms, including tobacco, corn, and wheat. He also experimented with agricultural innovations, such as contour plowing and crop rotation, and his design for a plow mold board won an award from a French agricultural society in 1807. Beyond simple agriculture, Jefferson also had a strong interest in growing plants for their beauty. He had hoped to ultimately create an ornamental farm at Monticello, a scheme in which the working farm would be combined with what he called the attributes of a garden. He experimented with a variety of flowers, including those native to Virginia, some brought from the northwestern United States by the Lewis and Clark expedition, and European imports. His activities with plants and landscaping is documented in his garden book. Books in general were an important part of Jefferson's life, for he was a great reader and one of the most educated people of his day. During his life, he acquired an expansive collection of about 6,000 volumes, most of which he sold to the federal government in 1815. This became the nucleus of the Library of Congress, now the greatest library in the world. The books presently seen at Monticello were not Jefferson's, but are duplicates of books believed to have been in Jefferson's collection. Most of the other furnishings seen at Monticello are the originals that were there in Jefferson's lifetime, due largely to the efforts of the Thomas Jefferson Memorial Foundation. In 1923, after earlier attempts had failed, the foundation was formed and began the monumental task of maintaining the property, accelerating restorations, and recovering the many objects lost from the original house. Today, through loan, gift, and purchase, most of the objects in the house are originals that were at Monticello during Jefferson's day. Throughout his life, Monticello was both Jefferson's passionate interest and his refuge. At the end of his second term as president, he retired to Monticello. In 1809, he wrote, "In the bosom of my family and surrounded by my books, I enjoy a repose to which I have long been a stranger. My mornings are devoted to correspondence. From breakfast to dinner, I am in my shops, my garden, or on horseback among my farms. From dinner to dark, I give to society and recreation with my neighbors and friends. Before Jefferson's death in 1826, he and Monticello had fallen on financially hard times due to mismanagement, the faltering of the slave economy on which plantations were based, and the agricultural depression of the 1820s. The year after his death, an auction of his household goods and slaves was held. By 1829, the last of his family had moved away. The plantation lives of Washington and Jefferson were indicative of a unique way of life that existed during earliest America's history. On the James River in southeastern Virginia, so-called Tidewater, Virginia, that way of life is also being preserved at a number of plantations, including the Shirley Plantation. This plantation is but one example of a way of life that characterized the southern states during America's early history. As was the case at most plantations, the Shirley Plantation includes a complex of buildings built to serve as the operational center of the plantation and to support the often opulent lifestyle of the planter in the nearby and all-important main house, or great house as it was frequently called. At most plantations, these buildings, called dependencies, were clustered near the main house, often including storehouses, a blacksmith shop, a smokehouse, stables, and quarters for slaves and indentured servants. A prominent dependency was always the kitchen. It was usually built a distance from the great house because of the heat it produced and because of concerns about fires. Here, slaves and servants cooked by fires and used implements that seem crude by today's standards to prepare a wide variety of foods. At Shirley, foodstuffs were taken from a number of sources for preparing meals in this kitchen, which was the plantation's original kitchen and functioned as such until 1942. The James River provided fish and fowl, nearby woods contained game, and of course the plantation itself offered fruits, vegetables, meats, dairy products, and other staples. The tradition of hospitality was strong at Shirley as at other plantations. One visitor in the 1830s described a meal that offered ham, beef, turkey, vegetables, and a special southern dish, hominy, made from white corn and beans. It was followed by a seemingly endless dessert that started with puddings and tarts, continued with ice cream and preserves, and concluded with figs, raisins, and almonds, accompanied by wine and port. At many plantations, distinctive dishes developed, and even today, recipes that have been passed down over the generations are still prepared. In Tidewater, Virginia, for example, a lucky visitor might still encounter such local delicacies as barbecued venison, wild duck hash, salt herring, roast suckling duck, sausage chowder, peanut soup, and of course, baked Virginia ham. Inside the great house, life for the fortunate few was indeed good. The plantation slaves and indentured servants labored to support the plantation owner and his family in regal style. Like other planters, the proprietors of Shirley lived a life that was truly aristocratic. Many planters idealized the life of English gentry, and when times were good, they were able to realize their dreams. With hard work and luck, they made their fortunes because of the demand for agricultural products from the New World and through other opportunities that emerged as North America was settled. Nails were manufactured at Monticello, for example, and ships were built in Tidewater, Virginia. Other Tidewater planters exported and imported goods, milled wheat, manufactured clothes from cotton, wool, or tanned hides, or cut lumber at sawmills for use in building ships and even for sale back in England. When the planter's financial affairs were in order, and they often were not, he was able to live lavishly, building extravagant homes such as those you have seen here, and acquiring fine goods. Furnishings like these were common in plantation homes, although many of the furnishings now at Shirley are replacements for other pieces sold in the early 1800s during a period of economic decline. Like the aristocrats of the old world who considered holding positions of power to be their privilege and their responsibility, the owners of Shirley and other plantations were active in the affairs of the church, state, and military. Among the Carter and Hill families who owned Shirley, for example, were members of the Virginia General Assembly, the vestry of Westover Church, and the Board of Governors of the College of William and Mary, and also militia and naval officers. In a fashion that further mimicked the nobility of the old world, children of plantation owners often married children of other plantation owners. This ensured that social prominence, wealth, and a uniquely privileged way of life were passed on to future generations. At Shirley Plantation, for example, Ann Carter married Light Horse Harry Lee of Stratford Hall in the late 1700s. Their fourth son was born in 1807, Robert E. Lee. For Shirley Plantation, it all began in the early 1600s. Edward Hill III, this man, was the grandson of the plantation's owner, Edward Hill I, who established Shirley in the early 1620s. Edward III had two surviving children, a son and a daughter. The son, Edward IV, shown here in a unique painting that may allude to his early death, died at 16 years of age, according to family history, leaving the daughter, Elizabeth Hill, as the sole family heir. Elizabeth married John Carter, son of prominent and powerful Robert King Carter, passing the plantation into the Carter family, where it has remained. Shirley Plantation has now been in the Carter family for 10 generations, an extraordinary accomplishment. This is especially true of Plantation, Virginia, where legends abound of family fortunes lost to wasteful heirs or dramatic turns in agricultural markets. Today, Shirley Plantation is owned by Hill Carter, a direct descendant of John Carter and John Carter's father, the legendary Robert King Carter, who was one of the wealthiest landholders in colonial Virginia. His landholdings are believed to have amounted to more than 300,000 acres. In addition to managing Shirley, which is now a farm of more than 800 acres, Hill Carter also preserves the plantation's great house and remaining dependencies, opening them to the public, greeting visitors, and often telling stories about his ancestors, King Carter in particular. One such story concerns how King Carter, who was then government land agent, expanded his own holdings by recovering land from settlers who had acquired free land allotments for transporting indentured servants to the New World. When the indentured servants chose to flee, their sponsors lost the free land.
The settlers brought over indentured servants, and his indentured servants ran away. The land that went with them, the 50 acres of land given to each colonist, and appropriated by the settler, was forfeited. And the prevailing law said that Robert Carter, the land agent, could not deed forfeit the land to himself. He didn't. But some court records show that one time his 3-year-old son, John, worked 4,000 acres. Now, this is just the beginning.
Like his ancestors, Hill is determined to keep Shirley Plantation in his family. Through his efforts, and those of others, a unique tradition will be preserved. The tradition of the Virginia plantations.